Let's see. Oh, it is called Do It. It's called Fun Factory.
Oh, Fun Factory.
Oh, watch out.
Okay.
There you go.
So yeah, I only know that because of the movie Stripes.
And Manfred Mann does it.
Interesting.
It was written by Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich. There you go.
Nice.
Now you know.
Now I know the deets.
Yes. All right. Hello, everyone. Hey, Jeff.
Good morning.
It is good, well, to virtually see you. I don't know what to acknowledge your reality through the medium of a message.
Digital expression.
Yeah. Ooh, sound, please. Is he not getting sound?
Yikes.
That's not good. Audio.
Test.
All right. Well, I think it should be loud. If anyone wants it louder, tell me. Sound, please. We got Durham. Hello from Durham.
Durham, not far away.
Well, you assume it's Durham.
Oh, that's true. It could be England. That's very true.
Oh, wait. Ron has it. There we go. Excellent. Hi, Joseph. Oh yeah. Try testing with the air horn. Done.
Just
nothing.
There's nothing helps us settle more into a contemplative space than the air horn.
Oh, exactly.
We should add that one to the app. Just a series, 3 minutes of air horn.
No, you should just add it randomly.
Oh yeah.
To every.
Boy, would that help the nervous
every
system.
meditation on April Fool's Day, right? Where you're just like, I can't even do the voice like you're Greg. You got a voice for it. It's like,
dude, you got the.
Do you find where your discomfort is located in your body? Or what if if you gave me your vocal tracks and I changed the music underneath it?
Right. I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
It could be.
Have you found your heart center? Where are you carrying that anxiety?
That's a dangerous toy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is, Greg. All right, I'm going to hit record now.
All right, let's do it.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Tripp.
And Greg.
Yeah.
Here I am. I'm here.
I know.
Present. Right on, man. Good to see you again.
It is good to see you. It's good to see all of you.
Yep.
Joining here. And you know what? The response is positive.
Good. The experiment, is it potentially successful? We don't know yet.
Well,
the data's not all in.
Yeah, I mean, but I feel like it was a solid first try.
Yeah.
No one said that was really weird when you prayed.
Well, that's good.
That's good.
If they did, they kept it to themselves.
Yeah, if they did, they kept it, which is great. Great that they kept it to themselves. One of the magical powers of digital technology, Greg, since we'll do that part at the end, is they could just turn off or leave it running, so that they get credit for praying, even though they're complaining.
That's
about it on the
way. That's the way to do it.
But if you're listening or watching later, you're just like, off.
Yep.
So that's yeah.
No, I'm with you. I get it.
Now, we have a number of topics that I'm looking forward to you solving for me.
Yeah, right. We could explore
that people sent in, and so we got a couple that are more specific about the individual in processing their own experience this Advent, doing the contemplation and such via Second Breath app and things. Also, larger ones about just being a part of different communities during Advent Christmas season. I at least got one person that was like, no, I really want you to have a long extended rant on Paul Ricoeur. We may get there. If we're running out of content.
There's a whole page. I got
my notes here.
With size 2 font.
Nice and organized here. Anyway, so we'll save that for the end.
All right.
If you were say to yourself, Tripp,
Paul Ricoeur,
I need some hermeneutics up in this piece. Can you give it to me? Then I will gladly oblige, because I'm a nice guy. When people, maybe one person
Maybe a person, maybe
A
a person.
The question is, there are more people that liked praying than requested Paul read. Whatever.
It's not an either or, man. We got time. We can do it all.
All right. Okay. So there were a number of these kind of emails, and the two that stuck out to me the most were, so I'll be honest, Greg, Tripp, I was kind of listening to the meditations on the app while I was doing dishes. Others, like my kids got out of the car, for school, and I turned it on. One person, let's just say that they might have been in the restroom for an extended period of time. It was like,
it's a perfect.
Is that okay?
Sanctuary.
Like, I used to tweet on the toilet, and now Greg's whispering to me in my ear. And
no, let's not bring my name into it. But yes, to do spiritual practice
and Jesus
on the toilet
just
is not a bad thing.
Jesus in the meditation this week, the peace meditation. Come all ye who are heavy burden, and I'll give you rest. And there were some fun jokes, but I say that because I actually think I'm interested in your response, because underneath those kinds of questions is the kind of assumption, like what is taking this seriously?
Right. Yeah. They're great questions, and again, I think a lot of times like we talked about last week, we approach spiritual practice oftentimes with a lot of unexamined criteria for what success should look like. One of them, I think, while I definitely think there's a space for being still and quiet in a room with no one else, that is not the only way to engage in spiritual practice and contemplation. There's so many ways. And in fact, one simple thing, talking about in the car, if you're dropping kids off or driving to work, even making the conscious choice, the simple choice to turn the radio off, and drive in silence. And it's amazing what that space can do, as you're not completely bombarding yourself with information that oftentimes is going to be, stressful, or whatever that dynamic is, to just ride in silence. And that can be true when we're doing the dishes. In fact, one of our spiritual practices is about mindful dishwashing. I mean, it's about actually recognizing that you can approach a task kind of like The Secret of Brother Lawrence, when he would peel potatoes. And it ended up being initially he hated it, but then as he continued to engage in it, the act itself became something beautiful to him. And so the ultimate point isn't to completely interrupt our lives for a micro dose of the monastic, and then we get back to real life. The purpose of spiritual practice is to begin to open our eyes that all of life is spiritual. All of life is an invitation into the present and into a growing awareness of our already existing connection with God, with one another, with the cosmos. And so doing that while we're driving, doing that while we're doing dishes, or even sitting on the toilet without kidding at all, can genuinely be a place of a space for that growing awareness to happen. And especially at the beginning, if there's someone who hasn't done spiritual practice or meditation, and they try to sit down kind of like a New Year's resolution and approach it that I'm going to sit for 20 minutes, the likelihood of that being success is about the same likelihood of the percentage of New Year's resolutions that are successful, which the last time I saw was like less than 3%. When one study that I saw come out, that less than 3% of New Year's resolutions are actually successfully completed, because New Year's resolution spirituality is ineffective. It's just trying to force it through behavioral modification, versus approaching it as an invitation to grow in awareness. And so what we're trying to do is not step out of life. We're trying to step out of autopilot. We're not trying to microdose the monastic. We're trying to step off the hamster wheel of just functioning in ordinary awareness and create some intentional space. So that can be done anywhere at any time.
Do you think that part of that assumption that doing it well, there are scare quotes in there if you're listening, involves escaping or separating and stuff, is connected to kind of the dominant image of successful faith, in America,
right? Where,
okay, we win by having our alternative culture. We separate from the sinners. We have our version of all the other parts of culture, our Christian sports leagues, all these, so much of faith done well, I think in kind of assumptive culture, is that the world we're in is so much the problem, that to do it well, you have to leave it.
Right.
And then if you don't have it in your makeup, in your schedule, in your time, in the demands, especially the kind of demands that come with work and family in our late capitalist culture and such, then you're like,
I can't do it.
WTF,
Right.
like, I'm gonna wait till retirement, Greg.
Exactly.
You know,
no, it's
and I think that, like, instead of escaping it's not so much about escaping. It's about cultivating a kind of attention to the world that you're in, as opposed to escaping it.
It's kind of like what we talked about last week, and especially now here during Advent, when we're contemplating even the incarnation.
Mhm.
That I really think it's a lot of spirituality in the West, and a lot born out of kind of some Platonic assumptions about the nature of reality, which is there's the invisible eternal ideal, and then we're in this fallen physical world, and we're constantly trying to escape our human condition to get up to the ideal, like to get up to the third heaven, to escape. And the beauty and the magic of the incarnation is that while we're trying to move up and out of our human condition, that Jesus passes us going down and in to the very human condition that we're trying to escape. And I think in that mystery, there's an affirmation that maybe the goal is not escape. That and I say that as someone who for many years actually, I think, kind of weaponized spiritual practice in my own world by using it as an escapist tool. That I would meditate for so long, and I would actually have the capacity to kind of reach this quiet, blissful state that just felt, almost like white light with my eyes closed. And it almost felt like I would have to return back to my life. And I would do that through some breath work and some different spiritual practices and contemplation. And what I realized over time was, far from actually helping me, that practice of escapism created what you're describing as that dualism. It almost reinforced the separation between the spiritual and the secular, the mundane, or the physical. And what I've grown and learned since then is that spiritual practice is not about escaping. Although I understand the temptation, I understand the desert fathers and mothers and why they wanted to get out. It's a real human impulse to escape the hardship. But I really feel like the real power doesn't come in escape, in getting away from. The real power is recognizing that right here, right now, in the mess and cacophony of our kids and our work schedules and traffic and air horns, and in the middle of life, that it really is a space to grow in awareness that we are already connected and immersed, and that everything's spiritual. That to me is the goal of healthy spiritual practice, not escapism, but growing awareness of connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's that's really helpful. And the comment there you made on about the incarnation. So one of the debates, this is Tripp's nerdy aside, Greg.
Love it.
One of the debates that rolled through the early church, and obviously they're using Platonic categories because that was the best account of the universe you had then.
Right.
But one activity was, how do you understand the divine's giving of the divine self to the world in the incarnation? Predominantly in the West, they understood the divinity and the way it occupied, in some sense, the humanity of Jesus, the relationship of the two, as an event that opened up or gave to Jesus the means for everyone else to be atoned, be redeemed, and that kind of thing. The more actually classically Platonic reading is that the event of participation donates, is a donation of the infinite to the finite. And you see this in the Cappadocians, Gregory of Nyssa, Nazianzus, that conversation. The ones that developed the logic of the Trinity later, is that in the incarnation, what the church is affirming isn't that this one particular person now has some superpowers that then we can fix things. It's that in this particular flesh, the infinite God of love came to dwell with us.
Yeah.
And because God has given God's self to the world, now all finite reality bears potential that it doesn't have on its own. Wesleyans tend to call something like this prevenient grace, right? You can see these different understandings playing out. One, where whatever is special in Jesus is something to fix something that's really sucky and crappy, and you should tell God thank you. Another, the incarnation, the gift of the divine life, is a gift that as Christians, we would say comes through the incarnation in Christ, but it is a gift that transforms the very potential of all finite things. There's a long discussion on the notion of participation in Platonism, but I
love that.
I just think it's helpful to understand that there's nothing like, yes, okay, we're both liberal Protestants, but there's nothing necessarily hippy dippy about the idea that should the infinite give itself to the finite, that it actually transforms the possibilities for all finite existence.
Right. No, I love that. And again, it's a and I would even, not only the power of nowadays, we can, call it that co-creation possibility of our engagement with the divine, with God, and living in a way that impacts the world for healing, for beauty, for love, in the paradigm of Jesus in the kingdom of God. And in addition, I would just say it didn't just, and this is just my perspective, not only did it just happen then, but it was also opening our eyes to what had always been, in the kind of the Franciscan perspective of original blessing, that in the creation itself, there's that the divine, and of course it's process theology as well, but and our open relational theology, but in that connection, that there's no separation from God in the entire cosmos. In the poetic language of the New Testament, it's that all things are held together in Christ. We're created through Christ and held together in Christ, all things. And there's some aspect of that I think is truly comforting, that I would say that, again, and I mentioned this last week, that the spiritual path, not only about growing our awareness of our connection, but, conversely, is healing the delusion of separation. That Einstein was describing it as an optical delusion of consciousness, that we're separate. Of course, he was talking in terms of physics and in terms of science, but he would say there's this profound connection of all beings. And he said that the work of true religion and is to invite us to heal this optical delusion of consciousness that we're separate. And the positive side of that is a growing awareness of our already existing connection with God, with one another, in the cosmos.
All right. We had a fun question connected to this. Ron in the chat said, I try to do intentional trail walking in a nearby state park, primarily for health reasons, but I often hardly notice the surroundings because my mind is rather free ranging. Is that contemplation?
That's beautiful. Yeah. In Japan, I spent my youngest years in Japan, and they would call that forest bathing. Then there's actually some real interesting research on the impact of immersion in nature on the body and what it does. I just think it's kind of like, there's also interesting research on the impact of water, being around bodies of water, and what it does to the nervous system. So yeah, I would say having that space. Sometimes I wouldn't, mix it up. Maybe sometimes you're listening to a podcast. Maybe sometimes you're intentionally. One simple practice that I do when I go on walks is, and this sounds so simple, it's almost silly, but it's actually significant. Pick a color. Start your day before you walk. Pick a color. And maybe it's pink, maybe it's purple, maybe it's red, and then on your walk, be cognizant of anything within nature that is that color. And all of a sudden, you begin to find these flowers, these buds, these leaves, these bugs, and all of a sudden, it's amazing how it grows your awareness of the beauty all around you that you haven't been really aware of. But that simple practice, again, the purpose is connection. The purpose is not escapism, but it's growing our awareness of the connection. So some of these practices might not seem super religious, but to me, I think that they're profoundly in line with the teaching that Jesus of Nazareth taught and embodied. And so that's the invitation, I would say. So yes, walking, sometimes letting your mind wander, sometimes giving, the way the Buddhists describe the mind is the monkey mind. And they would say, it's a bit of a silly example, but they said, sometimes you got to give the monkey mind a banana, give it something to focus on. So sometimes even choosing a color or picking a leaf off of a tree and spending 3 minutes just contemplating it, or looking at the clouds for a few minutes, giving them your undivided attention. All of these things, again, pull us out of autopilot and into the present moment. So I think all of those things, and over time, you begin to see the power. These, even a handful of minutes of spiritual practice a day, the impact over time is significant. You find yourself, it's kind of like when you're driving a car on a long road trip and you kind of come to again and realize you're like, what mile marker? How far have I been driving? I've kind of been on, in zombie land. And that's how a lot of us live life, that, we're just kind of on this low vibration autopilot, just functioning. And these practices just invite us out of that into the present. And the present is where we encounter God. The present is where we can grow in this awareness that begins to really transform us. And the more we do it, the more we begin to find ourselves able to pop out of autopilot more and more and more. And soon our day becomes predominantly out of autopilot instead of just functioning, on the hamster wheel. Great question, Ron.
Well, one of the other elements I think of thinking you don't have to have the perfect schedule and escape to insert attentiveness
Right.
is it actually helps me be aware that, like, I have the opportunity of opting into higher intentionality just in other things that you wouldn't if you were like, oh, this isn't my contemplative time. No,
Right.
this is my, like, not sucking at being a husband and dad time.
Right.
And I think that to me is one of the gifts of having those moments of attempts in the flow and flux of normal existence, is because I'm well aware of the creeping finitude and boiling anger that rolls beneath me when the world just doesn't cooperate to my will.
Right.
It's surprising. I have experienced the world revolving around me for years, and it doesn't appear that everyone else is on the same page.
No, when we discover we're not the center of the universe, it's really discouraging.
I know. So there were a couple of questions around this, and but last week our special kind of like bonus episode was on the podcast, and for the group was looking at Jesus in pop culture and music. And Dell, who did a great job bringing out all the ways we're asking all these spiritual questions in pop music today, even using the figure Jesus, right? And that sometimes those songs actually have permission to be more honest with our wrestling with Jesus than we can in religious space.
Often.
And so there were a couple questioners who said, you and Greg are both of the cloth. What is the inside scoop of wrestling with that, right? Like, they're like, y'all are clearly comfortable asking those questions on the internet and things. When you're in a church, what is it that leads you to either hesitate, mute, nuance, being more honest about the big questions of our time in the worship space or the congregational space versus whatever you want to call our couple thousand people Bible study with Dom Crossan on the internet. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a good. And let me just make sure I'm understanding the question. So you're talking about specifically when we're in worship.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. So, like, if the way they put it, it was not oh, I bet you're uncomfortable with it, Greg, aren't you? You're uncomfortable, like, thinking about how Jesus's own ministry could be it could be an example of condemnation to just what we do with Christmas in the present, or the song "What If God Was One of Us," right? And like that whole reflection,
right?
We are like, oh yeah. But what is it about church leaders that act like we can't trust our congregants to wrestle with questions when pop culture is going like, these songs are popular? They're writing them because we in the West right now are asking these questions.
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely in terms of my own experience within the church, it is not, it is not trying to convince someone of a creedal system. Again, that's maybe one of the benefits of being an Episcopalian. That it's we don't define, that we go back to Nicaea or the Apostles' Creed, which we recite, but even then we're talking about it kind of like Dom talked about at your this week, that these creeds are dated. They're reflections of moments in history of what was believed within the framework of that particular period. And so I'll often say in the liturgy, right before we say the Nicene Creed, and now let us affirm our faith in the historic words of the Nicene Creed. And I add historic when I'm framing it to describe that very moment. And so again, I think it is not trying to convince people of a creed. To me, it's about creating a space where they can have those honest questions. In fact, just yesterday, I was walking down a hallway at near this restaurant, kind of the strip mall, and this buddy of mine who sells insurance came to me, and he was really wrestling. A dear friend of his who was very sick and already for many years had been struggling with even wanting to live, and he had a child. And this father was saying, pretty much my energy for living is in caring for this boy. And then there was an accident this week where that child died. And my friend was and my friend was coming to me saying that he doesn't know if his friend is going to make it, or even if he'll take his own life. And he was saying to me, look, this idea of a God in the sky, why would God allow it? What is the point of prayer? Honestly, he said, my faith at this point is beyond, a whisper. It is wiped out. And just recognize at that point, and I said, well, why don't we go get a beer? And I could tell at that, I could see him kind of pull back a little bit. And I kind of asked him about that. And he was saying, he pretty much says, well, I'm afraid that, as a clergy person, you're just going to want to try to convince me again, propping up my ancient faith in this way of trying to reinforce me that God is still good, even though God didn't allowed that child. And it was so refreshing in that space to affirm his questions, affirm his doubt, affirm his anger, affirm his confusion, and then also throw in some beauty of the freedom of open and relational theology, which is a very, with God not as omnipotent. Yeah. But it was very pastoral. So to me, and maybe I'm not answering the question, but I don't feel the pressure. In fact, I feel like it's our obligation to create spaces where people can wrestle with the hard questions. And even for me within the liturgy, I mean, honestly, even for me, when I put on our cassocks and our vestments that I know date specifically back to Rome, in terms of their historical, evolution all these centuries later, I still get uncomfortable with it. I even get uncomfortable with the collar. So it's not as if there's not a real sense of dissonance within me, but then I'm open and honest about those things as well. To me, I feel like it's inviting people into the authentic questioning, trusting that truth is truth and that the divine can handle our wrestling. And it's not trying to prop up some archaic faith perspective that needs to crumble,
Yeah. Do you think when I think of how it functioned just like at staff meeting and worship planning,
yeah,
and how, and especially in hearing how other ministers wrestle with it, the people that are in leadership at congregations, especially the non-clergy leaders, are the ones that what's already happening works for them.
Right.
They love it and they give to it and they volunteer.
And then there's that.
So just know that that's the case. So sometimes I always say to people when they ask a question like this, like, how do we make more space for the actual questions people are carrying to get voiced in worship? I'm like, annoy your minister. Most of us that are clergy like the big questions enough to do graduate degrees about it. So if you ask the question, right, like you're like, give me a beer. Can we talk about the problem of evil and suffering and divine power? Are you wanting to wrestle with this? Because it's not like the clergy are against it. It's just so often the movers and shakers, aka the people that help your family keep health insurance,
right,
they self-select
yeah,
by being the ones that tend not to want that. So having allies in the congregation that request it, total game changer. It's for clergy. I made 4 points where you were talking that I think you tell me if any of these are interesting. I don't know.
Hit it. Man. I like the way your brain works.
Well, one, when it goes to this, we already as clergy have texts in our canon and elements of the saints we lift up that so often we edit them. We edit them because it's uncomfortable, right? That this figure, say Mother Teresa and her own wrestling with the experience of God, or the ethical foibles of certain leaders that we lift up at different times, that the scriptures actually have laments asking questions to God. There's literally Jesus on the cross in Mark. That there is a whole the volume of life that is given canonized language and the volume of canonized language that gets in worship, not the same.
That's very true.
The Venn diagram of what is left out, right? I think in that space, we actually have resources as a tradition to let people know, one, asking these questions, it may be asked in a new way in the sense of our contemporary context, but humans have asked those questions for a long time, and we thought it was sacred to do so. Have I told you about Job? Have I told you, these Psalms or that kind of thing? The second one was one of the gifts of a tradition is that when you have those questions, and even us clergy, when we have those questions, part of our task is not just to tell everyone what our questions and answers are in a given day. Our task is to give an affirmation that we're trusting the wisdom tradition of Christianity has something getting itself done in it that is worth giving yourself to. So you'd have no idea what's going to happen in the future of every child you baptized.
Right.
But the wager of faith for Christianity is that this image of God that you're holding is something to be celebrated. They are the beloved of God, and we're pausing and changing what we do in that service so that the whole community gathers around the community of friends and family to say, hey, you want to know what the most true thing about this child is that is coming into your family? Is that they are known completely and loved completely by God. It was true of Jesus, and guess what? We believe it's true of us. So family, this is what we're calling out of you. Congregation, here's what your job is for this kid, to raise them in a way that they come to know the deep affirmation of the divine. Right? We have those for all sorts of things.
Right. But baptism is one of the best. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But it's but like, if you just think through all those moments that we do, in those moments, we have all those doubts, but what does the tradition say? All those doubts are real and they're human. And what you're giving yourself to in the way of Jesus is that this is true about this child, it's true about you, it's true about your neighbor, and it's true about your enemy.
Yeah.
And I think that gift of the tradition's language is more, you're able to hear it more if in the times where it's not giving us the language, like the prayer book or whatever, we also voice all the questions and doubts and frustrations and things in the other spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's a helpful, when I was a PCA pastor, when I was an evangelical pastor, I definitely felt like mystery was that really irritating zone where my reason could not, my hands could not touch around. And it was something to tolerate at best and usually just be frustrated by. And I felt like my role primarily was giving answers. And I was studying the Bible in Greek and Hebrew, trying to build a brick by brick fortress of total solidity so that anytime there was a question, I would have an answer. And I think that that's oftentimes the view of clergy in the West, particularly in the evangelical tradition, to give answers. And I think where I've shifted in my perspective, well, first of all, now mystery is no longer just tolerated; it's celebrated. I think that's the good stuff, and it's also just reasonable that there's the amount I know is a thimbleful of the universe-sized ocean of what's out there. But also, it's not so much about giving answers, but about creating, being a part of creating sacred spaces where people feel safe to ask these questions and be in that space together. And I find that and I know what I believe right now in terms of my theological perspective or philosophical perspectives, in 1 year will be very different. In 5 years will be very different again. It's no longer, it is a living, dynamic, breathing, process. And I celebrate that. And it's no longer trying to nail it down. But I think as clergy, it's much more about creating sacred spaces where people can feel seen and safe and loved. And that's where the magic happens versus let me give you, you've got questions, we've got answers. Ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That reminds me of the way Paul Tillich, one of my favorite theologians, kind of wrestled with the task. What's the theologian's task in a world where before the whole framework of belief was Christendom, right? And so you had different relationships to it. You could be a heretic. You could be a lazy Christian. You could have opted out or whatever. But the thing you're understanding yourself in relationship to is the larger mythopoetical structure of Christianity, even if you don't understand it. The West was so Christianized, right? And so when culture asked questions were raised in culture, they were raised in the context of the big story we shared in a sense as the West. As that's fractured, multiplied, all sorts of varieties of big stories and failed stories and things are there, then culture kind of in some sense detached. Pop culture is an example of us still asking all these questions, but asking them anew and in different ways when there's not so much as a framing narrative. And so when he talked about thinking theologically, part of the theologian's task is actually to listen to culture, because it's always generated the questions of the times.
Mm-hmm.
And so often the church just regurgitates its answers,
Mm-hmm.
and you could end up answering the wrong question with a good answer, and ugly things happen. His favorite example is Calvinism. But it's not because there wasn't something that was beautiful in the context where it emerges. It's just if giving a particular answer over and over again, as if the only legitimate questions are the ones you already have set answers to, is problematic. Right. And so he called it his theology, thinking theologically about correlation. Taking time to look at the world and go, what are the questions seizing us now, and what does it demand? And then saying, how, as a steward of a tradition, do we honor that question and have it so shape our response that the tradition has demonstrated it's heard? And I think one of the things you see in people saying none, and my church in Los Angeles, UCC Church, quite a few of the congregants that donated and are on board said none about their religion. And I'm sure it's similar in a lot of liberal Protestant circles, is we say none because whatever the public statements of the church currently are giving no answer to the big questions that we have.
Right.
And I think recognizing that we don't get to pick the questions as religious authorities. We have to attend to them, understand them, and we do not have all the answers, but we have resources and practices and a diverse body to wrestle and think with. That's a very different way of making space for so many of those. I mean, Dell's examples at looking about the way Jesus functioned and is functioning in pop culture are great. And I just kept the follow-up conversation is taking his typology and helping those depictions of Jesus frame questions that we think about. Anyway, that was the only other thing I thought.
That's good, man. That's good. And I love that. And I think too, when we speak about worship, and I know that this is one of the topics coming up as well, especially as we're approaching for those that maybe have not been in church much and are going maybe back to church for Christmas services, or even just in general, how we approach worship. One of the things that I believe profoundly, and I saw the statistic on it for this, there was someone that went through the Bible and saw, how many answers did Jesus give when asked a question versus how many times did he give a question back to the questioner. It's something, it's staggering, that I think he maybe
the annoying prof.
He's annoying. I think he answered like 3 questions and something like that. And all the rest were questions in response to questions.
Yeah. And not sure the people that got the answer wanted it after they heard it.
Right. Exactly that. And so,
sell all your what?
Right. The rich young ruler, not real excited about that.
Tell me a story. Ask me a question, sir.
Yeah. But I think that aspect of if there's, instead of just imparting information, I really believe that, and I think this is what Jesus taught and embodied, is that for someone to experience real change, they have to tap into their wisdom within. That if you just give them an answer, it's just going to be, cognitive process that kind of just is stuck in the head and doesn't lead to real transformation. It's really tempting. And one of the things I found in spiritual direction, and I had to make a real change from pastoral counseling to spiritual direction. It's very different. In pastoral counseling, I'm approaching it kind of a Aristotelian reasoning way. I'm deducing, I'm examining, I'm concluding, and then I'm steering. But with spiritual direction, your assumption is you have no idea what God is birthing within that person. And your job is primarily not to pick the low-hanging fruit and hand it to them, but you're almost like a spiritual midwife, just there to create space to allow what is emerging, what the work of the Spirit within the person's emerging, to allow it to flow, and trusting that the wisdom is not in my hands, but it's in their hands. Sorry, I'm getting excited. It's wisdom within, that we assume that the wisdom they need is already within themselves, and we create the space. The kingdom of God is within. We are temples of God, where the Holy Spirit dwells. That this imagery, this expression that God is within, and then trusting that wisdom within. And truthfully, on a pragmatic level, that's the only way that people change anyway, is if they discover it and choose it, not because we're imparting information. And so I think that's a beautiful paradigm shifter in terms of church and worship and how we approach it, to create spaces where they can feel safe and experience that, begin to trust that wisdom within, in community.
Yeah. Okay, you hinted at one of the questions that came in a couple forms, all of which were, I'm thinking going back into a worship service over Christmas. My favorite was, if for nothing else than just to sing the songs with everyone, which I admit, like, I love Christmas songs, but
me too.
I also love singing with people, which is why, like, at Theology Beer Camp, this big event that I do once a year for like podcast listeners and everyone connected to it, because so many people have baggage with religious groups singing, we do slightly inebriated group karaoke.
I saw it. I saw it.
Which I have to say, I go all out for, Greg.
You did. You were 110% committed.
Yeah.
You withheld nothing. I think it was both that.
I leave it all on the floor.
You do. You
leave it all.
You give the people what they want.
But for people that have an on again, off again, a legacy of pain in it, how would you, if you don't have a congregation in the area, how would you even figure out which one you could go into and not leave running? But also, what is a way of setting yourself to appreciate what can be appreciated in it, and not let whatever frustrates you in the moment, ultimately ruin the experience?
That's a great question. And I think one thing, again, is examining our assumptions. Or sometimes we have our unexamined assumptions, and sometimes we feel like I'm supposed to go to church, that optimally I should reach a place of healthiness where I'm going to church, and that's the best good thing. And that if we feel like we're triggered or something is wrong, then we're somehow less than. I think if someone has experienced significant trauma in church, and it's going to be profoundly triggering in this season, then don't go. And I don't think that's wrong or bad or worse. In fact, I think that could be the healthiest thing for them, that they can still be in community. They can still be with like-hearted pilgrims trying to explore and walk this path. But I don't, and this is just my perspective, but I don't think that it is a better thing to go than not. I think that there's ways, if someone is in that place of woundedness. So let me just name that out of the gate. I think to examine, our belief, especially if you've grown up, well, definitely in the Southeast where Tripp and I are, in the Bible Belt, you're just supposed to. I know a lot of places in the other countries and the world, especially, in Europe, it's not the expectation. But I do feel like if there is a triggering event, and it's too triggering, then don't go. Then find other places to sing the Christmas songs with friends, and be in a space of again, your own worship. Again, I believe that us sitting here right now is the presence of God is equally here with us as when we were at the altar rail kneeling. I just genuinely believe that we are completely immersed in divine presence at all times. And I don't think it's more spiritual at church than it is when I'm at the grocery store. And so I think that there's a place for an experience that's a difference, but I also can experience uniquely the presence of God in the grocery store. So everything is spiritual. Let me just name that. Now, in terms of going to church with trauma, and I also can get triggered. And I'm a priest, and I do this for a living, but I also can get triggered. And sometimes, especially when I do pulpit supply at other parishes, and sometimes in these small rural towns in North Carolina that tend to be, we'll do a different rite, like rite 1 in the Episcopal liturgy is like, I'm a worm, I'm a piece of garbage, not worthy to get the scraps from the table. And it's this, really beat your breast. And I just, it's not my favorite language. And I even find that particular rite 1 liturgy triggering for me. I find it hard because of my baggage as a recovering Calvinist. And my total depravity, which I, slopped around in that slough for a very long time. But so even for me, I'm triggered, but I would say allowing, going in knowing that there are going to be aspects that are beautiful, and there's going to be aspects that are triggering. And recognize too that I call it the welcoming practice, that the purpose of it, if you're choosing to go because it's not too harmful and it's going to be a mixed bag, that even within that, the purpose is not to escape negative emotion or hard feelings. That if you're in a service and all of a sudden the minister says something that is triggering, or there's a particular aspect of the service that is difficult, then not repressing it, not shoving it down, or not thinking there's something wrong with you. But even at that moment, I literally, part of the problem is when we try to resist negative emotions. It's kind of like when my kids were little and we were playing at the beach and they were trying to do like roundhouse kicks into the waves to stop the waves. The wave is going to win. You can't resist it. The wave will win. So if you try to resist what is arising in you, it actually gains more power. But what would it be like in that moment to just acknowledge that anger, acknowledge that discomfort, acknowledge that frustration, acknowledge the injustice, and I even say, and welcome it. And then what I do, I almost picture it like a helium balloon, that whatever that emotion is, and it's almost me letting it go into the divine hands. It's letting it go into God's hands. And so I'm not pushing it away. And again, this is a spiritual practice that I try to do because my personality type is I want to have fun and I don't want to deal with hard things. And so this is a practice I've really had to do to stay with hard things. So anyway, but that's pragmatically, it's going into it knowing that probably the nostalgic Rockwellian Christmas service you're hoping for isn't going to happen. It is going to be a mixed bag, but that is not a bad thing. That you can take the beauty and the songs and the richness of the service along with the hardship, and that complexity weaves together into a tapestry that is life. And that the joy and beauty can coexist with the frustration and hurt, and they can live together to weave a tapestry that I believe is what Jesus was talking about when he was describing fullness of life. It is not zipping from victory to victory on the top of waves, but it is being able to experience the joys of life and also to be able to weep with those in pain, and that fullness of life is the full spectrum of the human experience. And that is welcoming all of it. And so anyway, that's a very large answer to the question of what's going to happen if you go to church on Christmas. But I do think it's nested in that invitation to open yourself to the complexity.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. The two things I would think of if you're looking, one, this could just be my bias towards singing, but I would look for which Episcopal church has evensong.
Oh yeah, there's some practical advice here. Like, if there's an Episcopal, I'm totally biased. If there's an Episcopal church in your neighborhood, there's a large percent chance it's going to be safe. Not completely, not 100%, but there's
the evening singing services, if they have them,
it's about the music.
Yeah,
all about the
music.
Go
in and basically, like, even if Greg was there, he's only got about 4 minutes. He can say anything,
not much,
and it's mostly reading historic prayers or scripture, and then you sing a lot.
Yeah, even song. If there's a trigger, that's great advice.
The other is you figure out where's the family service. You want to know what happens at family services? The senior clergy are going to probably let the others run it.
True.
And there's just a higher batting average. Like, even if you look at evangelicals, at the moment they're millennials and younger, over half of them are like down for gay marriage and think we should care about the environment. So, like, I know this sounds bad. I'm not trying to be ageist. I'm just saying, if it's a kid service, you got one thing going for it. One, there's lots of kids. You want to know what makes me smile a lot? Watching kids smile, and especially when they show up at some church they haven't been there in a while because they're visiting grandparents, and you see grandparents hug their grandkid they hadn't seen. Boom shakalaka. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Also, they're going to act stuff out and retell the story. And since you're in the Christmas stories class, you already know they're going to synthesize it. You've already done your Bible stories because Dom did it. So then you just go to sing, see the kids smiling and interact. And if you're lucky, you get to hold a candle and sing joy to the world. That's high quality material. Anyway, those are my tactics. Also, the Church Clarity website, if you want to make sure it's an open and affirming church and chooses to be known as such. That's the other basic one I'd check. But
what's that website again?
Church Clarity.
Yeah.
It is. It's really cool because it recognizes, like, there's a difference between, like, oh, I think we're cool, you can come, and then churches that go like, our identity is to be welcoming,
right?
And some of us heard, long for the day that there's Church Clarity about our support for neoliberal capitalist order and its pillaging of the planet and the poor. But there's growing edges.
We'll get there.
I'm just feeling animated because we had all this wise men don't go hang out with Herod agenda.
That's right.
Where the slaughtering of the innocents is happening these days. Anyway, look at this. You giggle and it just encourages Tripp.
I know the
derail.
power.
All right. So, all right, we'll do this one more question. Well, because we didn't get through as many questions this time.
No, we
No.
were blathering on.
I know. Okay, here. This one I think is more timely. Okay, so what kind of advice do we have for two different things? One, there are a couple questions about what do you do during Advent and Christmas with your kids if you grew up in a context where you just were like, oh, this is a literal truth, blah, 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 blah. Like, what is the age appropriate way you do the Bible stories, Christmas, Advent, Jesus, Virgin Mary, and the Santa stuff? There are different ones around that, the kid thing. Then there are others about how does this junk work when you show back up in a family and you're the minority opinion? And so whichever way you want to go with it. But I just think a lot of people are looking at schedules and going in now. You could creatively tell your fundamentalist family members, like, over Advent, I've just been in this online Bible study with a lifelong prestigious Bible teacher. He's Catholic, though. Catholic, though, but there's some Protestants that helped. And
well, maybe I could broaden out. Maybe I could broaden out and then zero in more specifically on Christmas and those family dynamics. But maybe broaden out to the idea of engaging our families with spiritual practice and an approach. I do think, of course, some traditions catechize, and they're really trying to train their children up to, even when my kids were young, I actually just had them memorize the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. That was about as catechized as they go. And then they were doing it mainly for the candy and for the reward. But we shifted, one of the things that we just found with our kids, it just, like anybody, it just becomes rote. Like we would sit down for family dinner and we would say the blessing, and it was just like blah blah blah, trying to get through it, blah 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 blah, just like a lot of kids. And so this might be considered woo, but my specialty is more where I'm more comfortable as the kids get older, as young teenagers, to be able to engage them intellectually and engage them in those ways too. But one thing we did, and again, Tripp, you might roll your eyes at this, but we experimented at dinner time that instead of a prayer, that we would actually just have this time of where they were just trying to rush through it, that we had a prayer bowl and we would just ring it, and we had to be completely still and silent until you couldn't hear the tone anymore. And it would be like a minute and a half of my three sons being completely still and silent. It was probably the only moment in the day where there was no motion except when they were completely asleep. And we found that time ended up, like when we finished those minute and a halves of listening, it was so rich that it became this tradition of when we would gather as a family. And then two with my boys, three of them, such distinct personalities, that one of my kids loved to do particular breath prayer. And so he loved it. And the others, my oldest was like, Dad, that is so lame. I'm not doing that. And then it just became, other ways of engaging him with practice. But that's the beauty of practice, that you can engage each unique personality. But again, I feel like the invitation, I do love to nest it in our rich Christian story, as we're doing with Dom, and the richness of the Christmas story, the richness of the Christian tradition. But what I feel like actually makes the coins drop, and what I mean by that is, and maybe that's an evident metaphor, but I was at this time when there were Coke machines that actually used coins, and I was with my boys and they wanted a soda, so I put the quarter into the top of the coin slot, and there was some gunk at the top, so it got hung up right at the top, and it was just past the place where my finger could touch it. So like it was the quarter mechanically, technically was in the machine, but pragmatically it was totally meaningless. And so finally I dug with my nail, and finally it was that satisfying thunk where it went into the machine, and then I could get my Coke. That's where so I feel like most of us have all of this great information and doctrine in our heads, but so often it doesn't make any difference in our lives. And so it's kind of like that quarter stuck up in the top of the machine, that mechanically, technically we have this information, but it's when the coins drop, right? It's when it lands into our hearts, lands into our bodies, that there's a shift and an opening. And what I find is, it's great to nest our kids in the richness of the story, but what oftentimes is going to help the coins drop is creating space for experience. And that's often through spiritual practice. And so maybe that's what, that's a way 30,000 foot view of the question. Now maybe you want to zero in more on the Advent or maybe Christmas times with family and the complexity of that.
Oh, I think when thinking about especially when your kids are home growing up, I think it's better to have thought about it and be on the same page with everyone in the house and be intentional about how you're attending to the season of Advent and Christmas than to just never discuss it and not get on the same page, because then it leads to different people having different feelings, like, oh, we're not doing it right, oh, blah blah blah, like where that this time is a gift to relate to each other and this time and the questions of Advent and stuff differently. And sometimes it just takes the 30-minute convo and going like, well, okay, well, here's the things we can all agree on doing, right? And let's do this. So doing something with intentionality as a whole is part of the act that I like. We love using the Advent candles and at night, because the themes like, oh, peace, Haven, the 5-year-old, peace is very different than the 14-year-old. And
sure,
in between, we have 3 that are spread out pretty significantly in age. I had a friend recently, Methodist minister, tell me about the what do they call it? The Jesse tree. So, and each day of Advent, you make a little art thing, and put it on a tree, but it tells the whole story of Scripture, like these moments where you see these different features in the story that ultimately show up in the life of Jesus. So you have like the Genesis creation story and all the way through like the prophets and all these kind of things. And like, this is the tree of our tradition. And he's like, the great thing is you make them, but as parents, you can use the little short devotions or things that are short to help you go, oh, here's a story, we're in it, right? So like, these are part of the story. When we celebrate the coming of the Christ, it's not this like in a vacuum setting up for Christmas. This is our history, and then what does it mean for us to address ours in the present?
Nice.
I think there's like lots of little things, but getting on the same page is, I think, the important and being present, the same thing. As a minister, I've tried and wrote all sorts of things for people, and done the Advent workshops every year, and then hear what works and doesn't work. And I'll just say the biggest thing that I was constantly shocked are people that were parents who would eventually go, so yeah, okay, but how do you pray with your kids?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you what? Yeah, like, how do you pray with your kids? And I only had my experience, so the pastor's kids and church planters' kids who have 2 clergy in the home are like, this is an option? Like, you don't, like, how? That just seems weird, right? And so that's why I said decide to do something, because sometimes it just takes having something from a trusted source that gives you 3 sentences where you get that silence, or like it takes like, okay, we're going to use this prayer bowl, and when it stops done, we're going to take turns, and someone's going to have 1 sentence,
right?
Which it could be like each week it's 1 sentence on peace. So where it's may our lives join the chorus of the angels,
sure,
who said,
right,
peace on earth, good, or whatever. There are lots of little things. So, and the fun part about a family is you literally only have to convince the adults and then invite with confidence the children. And the second year you do it, they're like, hey, it's Advent, are we not going to light the candle or do the prayer bowl?
Right. We always do that.
Thing?
We always
do this.
Yep.
It'll turn into, they can miss that. Repetition and traditions are really important for children. Just like we're about a week from arguing as to whether we open up Christmas presents on Christmas Eve or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're gonna have that debate.
All
but
right.
we always,
Right.
and I'm like, no, we don't. This is not our always.
Right.
It is one of those moments. Do you have a we didn't like, and now my wife and I are the oldest, so we had the first grandkid, which then when you have all the grandparents and 1 kid to spoil, it was nuts the first year.
Crazy.
So and by we, I mean, Alicia had this really good idea. I've since decided we came up with it together and then offer the wisdom as somewhat my own.
Nice.
We just started telling him, look, it's Jesus' birthday, so you can't get more birthday gifts than the birthday boy. So mom and dad get you one. Each grandparents can get you one, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's just really rude.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to a kid,
Right.
right? And
right.
we make huge deals on their actual birthdays, but like something like that, because we found, let's say certain parents may not appreciate this, but the moment you tell them, well, it's because we want them to have the meaning of Christmas in their heart. You don't want to ruin Jesus' birthday. We don't want it to be about possessions. It's about the love and the gift of the gift of the infinite God of love come to participate in our fleshly world. Emmanuel, God with us. We don't want to ruin that. And then, well, in that case,
right there you go. That's
why it's been successful so far as a talking point.
Yeah. Well, and my kids now are 24, 22, and 19. All they want is a red envelope full of cash. Christmas gets real easy in terms of present giving at this stage of life.
You should say, well, I can check on the back end how many meditations you've done.
Yeah, I always think coercion towards spiritual practice with a bit of fear or consequence, very effective. The church has been doing it for centuries, and it's really effective.
You're like, I'm not saying there's a hell. But
yeah,
I have it on good authority. You use this app every day. You don't go there. I'm like, Dad, I thought you said there's no hell, and if there is, it's empty. Baby,
I'm just finite human. Right.
There's an ultimate mystery here. I don't know. I'm just saying, better to be apt up.
Better to be apt up. There you go.
All right. We should do our.
All right, we'll do it. I know it's at the hour mark.
I know.
But I'll do a quick one. This is just a little 3-minute grounding.
Yes.
All right. You just muted yourself, so I know, and you just scooted back a little bit. So you're definitely getting into position. I love it, man. You're in the zone.
Look, I also know I have a cold, and the last thing anyone wants to hear is you say, "Hey, take a deep breath," and I'm like, and they're like, "Whoa!" Just imagine someone with headphones on.
Yeah, no, that's intense.
Yeah, and I want you to know right now that I will not.
Do not do that.
Hit a button.
You're gonna do it.
See, they're right.
Don't touch those. Don't touch that air horn.
All right.
Yeah, that would shock through the system. Although I kind of want you to now because I'm. Yeah, no, please don't. All right. So just as we enter this time again, let go of any expectation that it's supposed to be a bliss trip, and just allow and invite whatever comes up. If you experience resistance or it feels strange, that's okay. If you just want to listen, or if you'd like to really allow yourself to sink into it, however is comfortable for you. But I just encourage you to first get your body in a position that's both at ease and at rest at the same time. If you're lying down or sitting down, and allow your body to just settle and see if you can kind of unbrace your body, your whole body about 10% more. Just kind of see if you can let go of muscle tension. And it always helps to begin often by bringing awareness to your breathing. It's a simple way to land in the present moment and allow your breath to drop a little more deeply into the bottom of your belly than you normally do when you breathe. And see with your out breath if you can unbrace your stomach muscles. Again, it's so easy to carry around so much unconscious tension in our stomachs. And just let your muscles relax. Let them unbrace in this little time. And allow your shoulders to relax, fall away from your ears. Let your hands rest easily, comfortably on your lap or by your side. And let your jaw unhinge just slightly. Another place we carry a lot of unconscious tension. Just let your jaw have a little break and be at ease. And let your vision go spacious behind your closed eyes if they're closed, or just look down softly. And as you do, see if you can relax all those small muscles around your eyes and let your forehead, where we often have a furrowed brow, just let it be completely at ease. Just let it melt. Now bring your awareness to your heart space and the area around your heart. And see if you can soften the area around your heart just a little bit. See if you can just imagine it kind of softening and melting. And see if you're in imagination, if you can picture yourself breathing in and out through your heart space. And each inhalation is a yes to the presence of God. It's a yes to life. Again, in God we live and move and have our being. And with each inhalation, picture your heart being filled with that divine presence. And now bring your awareness up to your head. And this time, just allow your thoughts to just float past. You're going to have lots of thoughts. But see if you give yourself permission for them to just float past like leaves on a stream. And maybe even picture your brain just being really buoyant and light and at ease. And now with your body grounded and your heart open and your mind quiet, just allow this invitation from Jesus to wash over you. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And as this time of spiritual practice comes to an end, know that though it seems small, you've done really significant work in creating this space. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. All right, man. Just a little micro practice, head, heart, and body.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank
Right
you
on.
all that joined live. Those that joined later, remember, you can send in questions for next week. There are 3 or 4 we didn't get to because I would not call this our brevity of answer gathering.
This was not distilled.
But as you go, you can trust this, that the one that made all things knows all things, including you, the parts you love and the parts you don't, and they are called blessed. Go in peace, friends.